Be serious when it comes to serious things. This is the time to get serious. So let's start with the man. Let's look at Muhammad and the emergence of his religion, Islam, according to the standard Islamic narrative. Let's start with these claims made by Muslims. Whether they are radical, nominal, or liberal, they all claim that Muhammad is the last and the greatest prophet. They claim that the Qur'an is the revelation sent down to him, and that it's the final and greatest revelation. And Islam is the final religion based on Muhammad's life, sayings, and the Qur'an's teaching. In 610, when he was 40 years old, he had a vision of an angel in the Hira cave where he used to spend time meditating. The angel commanded Muhammad to recite. He said, "I cannot read, I cannot recite." Therefore, the angel tried to crush Muhammad. This happened 3 times, and then the angel let him go. He fled back to Mecca thinking that he was possessed. He went to his wife at that time, Khadija, and told her what happened. She took him to her cousin, Waraka ibn Nawfal, who was a Nestorian Christian. He listened to the story and says to Muhammad, "Truly, you are a prophet. This revelation has come to you." Between 610 and 622, he receives more revelations while in Mecca. He receives and recites these revelations, but they are not written down in manuscript form. His companions would memorize his recitations. According to the standard Islamic narrative, in 621, Muhammad was woken in the middle of the night, told to get on the back of a winged horse called the Burak, and he flies from Mecca to Jerusalem. At Jerusalem, he flies up to the 7th heaven and meets Allah. Allah tells him to pray 50 times a day. He then comes down 2 heavens to the 5th heaven, where he meets Moses, who says those are too many prayers. So he goes back and forth between the 7th and the 5th heavens and gets the prayers down from 50 to 5 prayers, after which Moses approves. He then comes back down to Jerusalem and returns to Mecca. This happens in 621. In 622, he moves from Mecca to Medina, known as the Hijra, with between 80 to 200 followers. Then from 622 to 632, he receives the Medinan revelations. In 630, he walks into Mecca and conquers it without bloodshed. In 632, he dies suddenly. The Quran in manuscript form did not exist at that time. It was memorized by many of his companions. Parts of it began to be scrawled onto bones, stones, and pieces of bark, but it was not written in book form. In 632, Muhammad dies. Abu Bakr takes over for 2 years, then he dies. Umar takes over for 10 years from 634 to 644, and he is killed. Uthman takes over as the 3rd caliph. He lives for 12 years before he is killed. Then Ali, the adopted son of Muhammad, has the last 5 years, 656 to 661, and he is killed. This is the basic narrative concerning Muhammad and the beginnings of Islam, as Muslims would have us believe. Is there any reason to doubt anything in this narrative? Where does this information about the life of Muhammad come from? If you are a Muslim, you would know these names: Ibn Ishaq, Ibn Hisham, al-Bukhari, Sahih Muslim, Ibn Dawud, al-Tabari. And you would know that these men are the only source for everything you've just heard about Muhammad. You would assume that these men who wrote about their prophet lived at the same time as him, and during the time of the 4 caliphs, from 570 up to 661. But no, the first time anyone hears anything about Muhammad's life is from Ibn Ishaq, who died in 765. But we don't have any of Ibn Ishaq's writings. Everything we know about Muhammad and how Islam began was actually written down by the man next on the list, Ibn Hisham, and look when he died, 833. Muhammad died in 632. How many years apart is that? Almost 200 years difference. So the first time we have anything written down about Muhammad's life, about how Islam began, about Medina, about Mecca, about him going up to the 7th heaven, all these stories were first written down 200 years after Muhammad lived. Ibn Hisham didn't even live in the same part of the world that Muhammad had lived in. He lived most of his life in Egypt, and when he wrote about Muhammad, he was living in what is now Iraq, hundreds of miles away. So hundreds of years later and hundreds of miles away, he allegedly gets his information from Ibn Ishaq. But as he himself says, much of what Ibn Ishaq said he did not trust, so he threw it out and only retained that which he trusted, if any. Everything we know about Muhammad begins to be written down in 833 by people who never met him, never saw him, never knew him or anyone who was alive at the same time as him. Just as Ibn Hisham never knew Muhammad, none of the other men on the list, Ibn Ishaq, al-Bukhari, Sahih Muslim, Ibn Dawud, or al-Tabari, knew Muhammad or anyone directly connected to him. Can you see the problem here?
It's very clear to you and to every single very advanced student and specialist that the standard narrative has holes in it.